All right, welcome back into our episode where we talk about our top 5 quarterbacks and top 5 tight ends in a little sneak peek to our overall rankings here. We're going to get into the tight end section. Again, if you have any thoughts and comments on our rankings here today, feel free to leave a comment so that we can go back and forth and give you our reasoning why a little bit more, or we'd love to hear your reasoning why. Maybe you'll change one of our minds a little bit. That being said, we're going to go over to the unanimous number 1 overall tight end in everybody's books, and that's Travis Kelce. We don't have to stay a long time here because we know what we're getting out of it. We're getting a wide receiver in a tight end position. There's nobody else on this list that can consistently do what he does. People have done it before, but not consistently, and that's why we have him ranked at number 1. When you look at it from a year after year standpoint, he is Pat Mahomes' favorite target in terms of overall targets. His yardage may be below the top receiving yards for the team, but it's usually up there. For the past, since 2016, he's gone over 1,000 yards. In fact, he's only dipped down under 1,100 yards one time. He has consistently gone from, since 2017, over 8 touchdowns all but 1 year, as high as 12, which was last year as well. He's got a fantastic catch percentage as well. So when you look at a guy like this that's consistently catching the ball for a career 71%, he's a guaranteed go-to solid receiver. I can't even call him a tight end for his quarterback. So to me, he is the only tight end that you should be looking for in the first round if you're looking to take one that early. And I could argue in the first 2 rounds.
I don't think that there's much we need to say about Travis Kelce. Here's what I'll say. If you don't have him as your number 1 ranked tight end, I want to know why. Please leave a comment and just I want to hear from you. I want to know why you think. I've heard some things about how he's going to regress and his touchdown. Stop. Just stop. He is friends with Mahomes. They his usage. Yeah, they took him off the field. He's a red zone target, a huge red zone target for Kansas City on a very, very potent offense. He's the number 1 receiver on that team. So the same reason you like Justin Jefferson or Cooper Kupp or any of these top end receivers, how can you not like him? So I don't think that we can throw stats at you all day, but if you're not taking, if he's not your number 1 tight end on the board, you're probably not winning championships.
I mean, just here, we'll leave you with one little stat for people who want to argue anything. He outperformed most of the wide receivers last year. He finished with the 3rd most receptions in the NFL, period. If that doesn't tell you enough. 3rd most receptions, period. That's not tight ends. That's all receiving stats. So let's move on to our number 2, which both you and I have the same as well. And this is before it gets a little funky. But we've got Mark Andrews both at the number 2. In fact, that being said, Mark Andrews is all dependent upon Lamar Jackson and that offense there. So it could go one way, could go another. We're talking about a guy who consistently was going from 700 to 850 yards, except for one blow up year in 2021 where he had 1,300 yards and 9 touchdowns. You have a difference in Baltimore with a little bit more receivers there with Odell Beckham. You've got Zay Flowers, the new rookie, and Rashad Bateman, hopefully for a full healthy season. So Jackson's going to have some other options, but they're also supposed to start throwing the ball a little bit more there. And if there's one person that I know Jackson's going to be comfortable with, and he's shown it through his tenure in Baltimore, and that's Mark Andrews. The guy is tried and true in the red zone. After that 2018 rookie season, he has not gone below 7 touchdowns in a season, which is great for a tight end. So it's realistic to see him get close to that 1,000-yard mark again here, and I expect him to be anywhere around 7 or 8 total touchdowns on the season, bringing him in at your tight end number 2.
Yeah, even in games that Lamar Jackson was injured, he was very consistent. He's a big body target. I think having more receiving options there, especially having quality receiving options, not just one. They have Odell Beckham, they have Rashad Bateman, they brought in Zay Flowers. It's going to take attention of the coverage, of the defensive coverage, and we're talking the back end safeties. So Mark Andrews is a mismatch for any linebacker in the league. And if the safety has to respect the speed of Odell Beckham and Rashad Bateman, it's going to open up more for Andrews. And I think that Andrews being a favorite target, the one thing I'll say about Andrews, I think we're going to see kind of an emergence of a 2 tight end system. I really like Blake Likely this year as kind of a sleeper tight end. If anything happened to Mark Andrews, he is going to be an elite option. Mm-hmm. But the consistency of Mark Andrews is just something you can't ignore. And it's way more consistent than TJ Hawkinson or George Kittle or any of the other guys in the top 5. His numbers have always been up there, and he is the favorite target of Lamar Jackson. If Lamar Jackson is going to be, and the Baltimore Ravens are going to be successful, Mark Andrews needs to be successful. And Correct. Having a tight end that scores 7+ touchdowns a season is something that you want from a top end tight end. And like I said, we've talked about this before, where there's Kels and then just a mile of everything else, and then there's Mark Andrews, right? There's it's not this comparison of like Mark Andrews has the potential to be like the number 1. No, it's Kels is going to be the number 1, and then it's who is going to finish as the top guys after that. And what you're looking for from these quote unquote elite tight ends is consistency. You want guys that you can play every week instead of having to stream tight end, which there's an option there too. If you feel more comfortable doing that, you go right ahead. Like there's a lot of deeper options that you can go do that with. But if we're talking about our rankings and what we see from the top 5 guys, that's what we want. We want guys in the top 5 that we can plug and play every week. Like it's set it and forget it. And yeah, they're gonna the tight end position as a whole, they're gonna let you down from week in and week out. Like they're gonna have some really good weeks, and then they're gonna have some subpar, sub 5 weeks. Travis Kelce had that last year, and so it's just the nature of the position. But Mark Andrews has been really consistent over the last couple of years when he's been healthy on putting up solid numbers from the tight end position. That's what you're looking for from a number 2 tight end. I think second round is a little too rich for me, but in the third round, if Kels is there, and that's the kind of strategy I've been looking for, is to solidify.
You mean Andrews?
Sorry, well, no,
Andrews.
Kels is the number 1 off my board.
Yeah, but you're saying third round. If Andrews is too rich for the second round.
Yeah. If Andrews is still there, it's a little too rich for second round is a little too rich for me for Andrews. But in a third round, if he's there and that's the strategy I'm looking for, then yeah, I would go and take him in the third round to solidify that position.
I agree with you there too. And here's just a couple little nuggets to chew on. Is he has been a top 5 or better tight end in the past 4 seasons. In fact, he was in 2021. He was the number 1 tight end. Barely the number 1 tight end, but Travis Kelce's season last year would have beat that number 1 tight end in 21. Here's the hard part though, and this is right before we jump out of Andrews and start talking about where we differ in this, and the reason why I put a little bit more onus on these numbers, which gave me to the rankings I have, is the fact that there seems to be a benchmark number out there of 140 points for tight ends. For you to go, if you got 140 points or more, you're an elite tight end in the in fantasy, but in the NFL too, in terms of your usage on your team. Mark Andrews done it 2 times out of his 5 years. I mean, you could throw away his rookie season. He only started 3 games. So that being said, you look at Mark Andrews on the other games, he literally has hit 140, 112, 194, 117 last year. That's why I have him as number 2. Now, the next guy at number 3 has done that as well. He's hit that 140 mark in 1 season and has the potential to do it every single season if he can stay healthy. And that's why I have George Kittle at number 3. Now, where you differ is you've got TJ Hawkinson at number 3.
I think Kittle at 4.
You have Kittle at 4. No, I actually have Hawkinson at 5, and I could talk about it when we start talking about Hawkinson. So we'll start talking about Kittle. And that being said, George Kittle has been a centerpiece and a constant for that offense before they got Christian McCaffrey last season. But that being said, you've had a carousel of receivers in and out of the San Francisco offense, but the one constant since 2017 has been George Kittle. The guy's had 2 seasons over 1,000 yards. He had, in 2021, almost had over 1,000 yards. He had 11 touchdowns last year in 15 games and 765 yards. The guy's an elite pass catcher. his yards after the catch are what make him very special compared to Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. Like, he does a lot with the ball after he gets it in his hands. And that's why I have him at my number 3. I just think he has supplanted himself as a better receiver, a number 2 option, if not quote unquote number 1 option, but number 2 option for the San Francisco 49ers. He had only 86 targets and 60 receptions last year in 15 games. He had 94 and 71 the previous year in Debo's big blow-up year. I still think he's going to find himself upwards of 100 targets again, and receptions up near the 70s, and that's going to give him, wide receiver 3 status with the potential to break into the number 2 in the season, even with somebody not Jimmy G throwing him the ball. And we saw that last year. So I like him a lot. Give me your thoughts on Kittle alone and why you have him with somebody else above him, and you can start talking about Hockenson.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, let me start by saying Kittle might be my favorite player in the NFL. I love him. I had him his rookie year. I had him actually the first 3 years that he was in the league.
Yes.
Let me say this for Kittle last year. All right. Because he did have 11 touchdowns, you said?
11 touchdowns on 60 receptions.
So 7 of those touchdowns came in the last 4 weeks of the season.
Mm-hmm.
And 7 of those touchdowns came with
Brock Purdy.
With Brock Purdy.
Mm-hmm.
If Brock Purdy is the starter, Kittle could be the number 1. If Brock Purdy is the starter the entire season. Because the way that offense ran with Purdy is exactly what Kittle is made to do. They run the play action so well and attack the middle of the field. And you're absolutely right. His ability to after the catch is what separates him from every other tight end in the league. Now, I love Kelce. I think he's a dynamic receiver, but he is not making the kind of plays that George Kittle is.
No.
George Kittle might be the best tight end in football overall, not fantasy, just overall, because he can pass block, he can run block, he can catch, he can run routes, he can catch out, and he can break tackles and have yards after the catch. But if Purdy's not the quarterback, if they have to start the first 6 weeks or 4 weeks with Trey Lance or with Sam Darnold, I don't know. I mean, it takes a big hit on his draft stock, but you're going to get Kittle at more of a steal in the 4th or 5th round. Kittle's a guy that I would take. I would probably take at the back end of the 3rd round into the 4th round if he's available. I do have Hockenson over him just because I'm not sure on if Purdy's going to come back and again what that is going to look like. Teams now have a full offseason to kind of scheme for that offense, and I don't know. There's question marks with that. With who's going to be quarterback there, and what the offense is going to look like, at least for the first couple weeks of the season.
But you don't see that even with say Sam Darnold projected to be the starter right now over Trey Lance. You don't see Sam Darnold having a rapport with George Kittle, probably the most veteran guy next to McCaffrey there.
No, I think they're going to play it safe.
That is safe to me, though. I feel like Kittle is the safe play.
No, I mean, like they're going to listen. I don't necessarily think that he's just going to disappear in games, but
yeah.
You saw I don't see the kind of numbers that he was putting up at the end of last season. Like with Purdy in what 3 of the 6 games that Purdy started, Kittle had 2 touchdowns. Half of the games that Purdy started during the regular season, Kittle had 2 touchdowns.
But he also had, in week 10, he had 4 catches, 84 yards, 2 touchdowns. In week 6, he had 8 catches on 10 targets, 83 yards. He had a 6 for 98 and a touchdown. Like, he wasn't forgotten about the rest of the season. There were some really bad games, for sure. There were. Yeah. But I also think the emergence of Christian McCaffrey helped him more than anything.
I did too.
So I think it's a twofold, which is why I like him at my number 3. Is it's just he is a consistent, solid guy. I'm not saying Hawkinson's bad by any means. I'm just saying
It's really close. Like they were really really close in terms of that ranking, and I can be swayed one way or the other. With they're my 3-4. Let me just say that. So whether I have Kittle above Hawkinson or Hawkinson above Kittle, the reason I like Hawkinson over Kittle is as I, I think because Justin Jefferson, there's going to be so much. We talked about it earlier when we talked about Justin Jefferson. There's a lot of other playmakers there on that offense, so it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
hard to scheme. And if you have coverage that's moving over, we saw when he was traded over to the Vikings, what kind of usage that he got, and he went from being like an elite talent just in an offense that didn't utilize tight ends to a team that utilized their tight ends and had an elite talent there. And so I thought that Hawkinson, when he was on the Vikings last year, really started to produce consistently, and that's kind of what we've been hoping for since he was drafted by the Detroit Lions. We just never saw it because that team just doesn't like to use tight ends. Same
Mm-hmm.
reason I didn't like Sam Laporta this year. Even though he's an elite pass catching tight end, they don't use him.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't care that he's really good because we saw it from Hawkinson. So Liz, I like Hawkinson in that offense, and I kind of like that. I like the passing offense better. I think San Francisco is a better offense as a whole. I think the passing offense is better in Minnesota, which is why I like Hawkinson a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have Hawkinson as my number 5, and this is my only reasoning. Is again, when I'm talking about tight ends who have the potential to go over that 140 range or who have actually done it in their careers, what I would say, there's only been 4 of them in the active tight ends right now, and Hawkinson is not one of them. Hawkinson last year had 129 points in fantasy football, best season by far. It's his first time breaking into the top 5 finisher in fantasy. He had a top 6 finish in 2020, I believe it was. But here's the stat that had me taken aback a little bit. Like, volume is what he may get, but again, I see Jordan Addison helping take away a little bit of that volume where they used him last year because I think Thielen was kind of on the way out, where now you get another youthful player in there. But last year in Detroit, he played 7 games and started all 7. He played 10 games for Minnesota and only started 7. So let's just take those 2 sample sizes. He went from having 15.2 yards per reception in Detroit to 8.7. He went from having he had 3 touchdowns in both the teams there in 7 games. He also went down from a 56.4 yards per game with Detroit down to 51.9 yards per game with Minnesota. If it wasn't for that 120-yard, 2-touchdown game I think he had at the end of the season, his numbers in Minnesota would have been shadowed by his numbers in Detroit. So I think he was used downfield differently in Detroit, and he's not used as downfield as much in Minnesota. And I think it's going to stay that way. And that's where touchdowns are going to matter for him in Minnesota. Volume is going to matter for him in Minnesota if you're going to see him get back into that top 5. And I'm not saying he's not going to be there. I just foresee some 3 wide receiver sets. KJ Osborne's talented. They drafted Jordan Addison in the first round for a reason. And yeah, Hawkinson was a first-round tight end. Don't get me wrong. He's a talented guy. I have him as my number 5 tight end, so he's still top 5 for me. I just don't see him getting up to that 140-point mark. That's my benchmark, like I said, for the elite top tight ends.
Let me say this for Hawkinson, okay? So I would say that Minnesota lost their 2 most significant red zone players, the Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook.
Mm-hmm. I could agree with you that.
We already said, when we talked about the wide receivers, that Justin Jefferson is not a red zone threat. He is not targeted in the red zone significantly compared to other players on that team. So if we think that there's a vacancy on red zone targets, do we think that KJ Osborne is going to take that, or do we think that Jordan Addison is going to take that, or will we see an uptick in a bigger body guy like TJ Hawkinson who can be effective in the red zone? That's where I think that the potential is, and that's where I think that you're going to see an uptick in red zone targets because they're not going to run the football as much, or they're not going to use Dalvin Cook out of the backfield, and they don't have Adam Thielen who can have double-digit touchdowns just because of red zone targets.
Yeah.
So I think that Hawkinson's numbers, at least the touchdowns-wise, goes up, which would bring him into that 140 range. 2 touchdowns brings him into that 140 range.
Well, I mean, here's the only thing I will. I will say is looking at the stats here, and I don't know for they don't have him down for some reason as Minnesota. That's interesting. I'd have to look in Detroit real quick. But last year, TJ Hawkinson total season had 20 targets inside the 20, but let's talk about inside 15 where it really matters, where you get your touchdowns. He had 16 targets, and in terms of Minnesota, in terms of wide receivers, where are wide receivers here? Wide receiver wise, Jefferson had 21 targets and Adam Thielen at 15. So that's 15 targets being vacated by Thielen. KJ Osborne did have 8 targets, but you're right. And that was as a wide receiver 3. So I think there's 15 vacated targets in terms of red zone opportunities. And then when you look at Dalvin Cook, receiving wise in the red zone, he had he had 8 targets as well. So it wasn't a high sample size for Cook in terms of that, but the rushing portion of it inside the 15 is high. I do agree. There's going to be opportunities in the red zone, and that's where he does thrive. But like I said, and I'll go back to the one last stat here, and we'll move on to our number 5. Number 4, because he's my number 5.
Talk about Kittle.
Oh, you're right, Kittle. So number 4. But is last year.
Number 5.
It wasn't only that his yards per reception went down when he moved to Minnesota, but it was also his yards per target went down as well. Like, there were just a lot of stats that went down in terms of that it's going to be a volume thing for him, and it's going to be a touchdown thing for him, pure and simple, which is why, to me, I just didn't like it as much at the number 3 spot, but I have him in my top 5 regardless. He's still in the top 5. That being said, my number 4 is not even in your top 5.
No.
And that's Darren Waller. And I'll talk, and you'll see the full rankings list to see where Chris ranks him. But I'm going to make my case here for Waller at number 4. When we're talking about that 140 number in terms of points for fantasy football, Waller hit 171 points in his best season. Right? Now, injuries have been his issue. And injuries aside, it's hard to argue that this guy is not going to be the most targeted player in that Giants offense. He's a tight end by title and by position, but he's not a tight end by his play on the field. And that's how I expect the Giants to use him, because they didn't go out and they didn't draft one of those top wide receivers in the draft this year. They didn't go get somebody in the first round. In fact, in the offseason, they sign a couple guys to a couple small contracts that have been constants for them in terms of Darius Slayton and Isaiah Hodgins. So you look at Waller in 2019 and 2020, in the 2 seasons where he pretty much played a full season, he had 16 games and then 15 games. He was able to produce over 1,100 yards, and one of the seasons had 9 touchdowns. Now you look at it, he even had yards per reception of 12 or more in the past since 2018. That's hard to find on a tight end side outside of Gronkowski, who holds like some ridiculous stat. I think it's like 15 yards per reception or something like that in his career. So that's where you are drafting Darren Waller in your 4th ranked position, like I would, based on what his potential could be. He had last year 9 games, only 6 starts. He only had 43 targets. 11 games, 11 starts in 2021 for the Raiders. But everybody wants to think that 2020 was very far season away, and it's not. And now he's in a new regime, a new offense. They're going to get crafty.
It is when you can't stay healthy. And the last 2 seasons, he had great numbers in 2020. But the last 2 seasons, he hasn't been healthy. And so, potential-wise, he's there. It's the same thing. It's the same argument for Lamar Jackson from the quarterback position. Lamar Jackson has no business being outside of anyone's top 5, except for the fact that every year he can't stay healthy.
Correct.
And so talent is going to drop you down when you're only getting half of the games of the season. So no one I think is arguing any talent on Darren Waller.
But here's my argument to that is, so you got to take away 2015, 2016. He obviously missed 2017. He wasn't even in the league. And then he came back in 2018 again. And that's when he was a wide receiver. When they moved him to tight end in 2019 is where he kind of emerged and became who we know as Darren Waller. So from 2019 to 2022, he had 2 full seasons, and then the past 2 seasons missed a significant amount of games. He played 11 games in 2021, so he only missed 5 games. And then last year is when he missed the significant, but I also think the Raiders just didn't put him in. I think that was another issue. I think they were trying to ship him off to somebody too in midseason. But that being said, you're not making the same argument for Saquon Barkley, not being a top running back. People try to make that argument, and then he comes back and he does what Saquon Barkley does in a full healthy season, under a new regime. You make the same argument for anybody, like with injury history. He's only had 2 consecutive years of somewhat injuries. Somewhat. I just don't see, in my mind, I don't see him not coming out.
Games, though, when you miss 6 games, so that's essentially, I don't know. Like, I probably wouldn't go and draft Darren Waller. He's not in my top 5. But I probably would stay, like, he's kind of, if I don't get the top 7, I'm probably gonna go and grab 2 guys that are later. But if I draft, so let me say this, he's probably my 7th ranked tight end right now. I'm drafting someone else. Yeah. I would go and draft probably a couple rounds later Njoku or Everett or someone else that's going to be consistent, because when he inevitably gets hurt, then you're going to be out and trying to pick up scraps on the tight end waiver wire. So do yourself a favor, when any of these guys that have injury concern, or you might have concern about with injury, go ahead and draft another middle range guy, because and do yourself a favor, because if and when he gets hurt, you're going to be wasting a 4th round draft pick on a guy that's only going to give you 8 games in a season.
But here's the only thing I got to say. He's only done that one time. Like he missed 5 games in 2020 or whatever it was, or 6 games or whatever it may have been. But or 2021. All I have to say though at the end of the day is, if you have a guy that you can draft as a game-changing player, and especially at the tight end position where you talked about, you have Travis Kelce, a whole lot of nothing, then Mark Andrews, and you've got only a couple people right around Mark Andrews that have ever done what Mark Andrews has done, and that's literally Andrews, Kittle, and Waller are the only 3 active tight ends that have gone over 140 points in a season for fantasy football. Okay? You put yourself at an advantage, again, yes, if he stays healthy, but I'm ranking him and I'm basing him on health, because he's only shown me in a year and change of not being healthy. Not necessarily multiple years like everybody's expecting this to be. Like, as a tight end, he has had 2 consecutive first 2 seasons as a tight end for the Raiders. He was healthy and a stud. And then he had 1 season where, he missed 5 or 6 games. And then last year, he only played in 6 games. I'm not, last year to me is the anomaly. I'm saying going into this year for the New York Giants.
In the last 2 seasons, he's missed an entire season.
Yes. But you could say the same thing about Saquon Barkley 3 seasons ago with the ACL injury and the sprained ankle and all this. And then he comes back and
even
he puts
with the
himself.
Sprained ankle, though, he missed 3 games and then came back. That's not Waller missing 11 games from multiple injuries too.
No, the year after his ACL, he came back and he had an ankle injury after that. Mm-hmm. And I think he missed maybe 4 games or something, Saquon. Like, he missed plenty of time too as well. And yet the talent is there. And you can't draft people based on, I'm not going to draft him because he's going to get injured. You don't know injury status. Like, you can see the past 2 seasons he's had injuries.
Here's my argument against that is you're comparing it to a running back position. And the running back position, you're when you get one of those high-end guys, we're talking about 140 points. In the 4th, if you're evaluating him at a 4th or 5th round draft pick, even a 5th or a 6th round draft pick, the running backs and wide receivers that you can get there and let someone else deal with that and go and get a tight end on another 2 rounds and get him in the 8th round, I'd rather do that. If the difference between Darren Waller getting 140 points and Dallas Goedert getting me 120, or Dalton Schultz giving me 120, where I can get Dalton Schultz in the 9th or 10th round, I don't care about the 20 points there. I'm going to make it up because I'm going to be able to draft a higher end wide receiver or running back. Like, I'd go get a middle range quarterback. I'd rather do that than go and get one of these these question for me he's a question mark at tight end because I'm not disagreeing with you. If he stays healthy, this dude is super uber talented.
Yeah.
To be completely honest, I don't even know why the Giants signed him. Like I really like Bellinger there. I really don't. Like I really like.
I do know why. I do know why is because they're going to do 2 tight end sets very often, and they're going to use Darren Waller in the slot. They're going to use Darren Waller out wide. He is not going to be used like a tight end, which is why I'm saying
Kenny Golladay.
No, Kenny Golladay. He's more than a Kenny Golladay.
Tight end of Kenny Golladay.
No, they did because Kenny Golladay was a contested catch guy, and I thought that was the worst signing ever, especially what they paid him.
Yeah.
If they got him for half, I still would have said it was a terrible signing because he just didn't have what it takes to be that X receiver. He's not a Calvin Johnson, and Detroit realized that soon, and we're happy to get rid of him. Here's in my opinion with Darren Waller is he's going to be used very differently than the other tight ends on this list to me because of just the weapons around him automatically put him in a pseudo wide receiver 1 position, and Bellinger's going to be there and get his too as well. But there's going to be 2 tight end sets. You're going to see more of like a Gronkowski role out of him, the way they used him in New England, than I feel like you're going to see Darren Waller was used in Las Vegas. So that's why I have him as number 4. Is
I think that's best case scenario.
Yeah, but I think there's no other scenario that you see out of that. They're not going to sign him and pay him if he's not going to be that. That's the thing. So again, I'm not saying my number 4.
Kenny Golladay.
Yeah, well, no, that was Dave Gettleman. You got to understand, there's a whole new front office there.
Get that. I get that there's other receivers here too. So I agree with you. I think that there is going to be some volume there. Like I still have him ranked in my 7th ranked wide receiver or tight end.
I think it's a reasonable ranking for him because where he could finish, I think he has a range from 2 to 7.
I don't drop him off too far on that, but it's just because
we're not talking about missed games from Kittle though either. Kittle has played 1 full season, and that's it.
Yeah.
So I mean, but Kittle, when they're Kittle's in there and they're healthy, they produce. I mean, Kittle's had only 1 season of in double-digit touchdowns. So is Waller. I mean but again, when they're in there and they get targets and they get highlighted and featured, they produce. And I think you're going to see both Kittle and Waller take a step up amongst the rest of the tight ends and be featured.
Yeah.
So, let's move on to
favor and go in the 1st round and draft Travis Kelce.
Yeah, just like if you really want to give yourself a situation. Yeah, if you could see the discrepancy we have in here, there's even more when you're trying to figure out who you want to draft. That being said, outside of Travis Kelce, you take your shot on the tight end you want, or you wait and you take on the potential of a young guy or a guy in a new system. Because these Wallers, these Kittles, these Hawkinsons, unless they fall and you get them at value, like Chris said, there are running backs and there are wide receivers that are in their ADP range that probably have better value on your offense and will give you more points over the course of a season and feel better about starting on a weekly basis. Like your Tyler Lockett's, like your Chris Godwin's, guys like that are going to be
White's.
there. Yeah. Well, even Rachaad White's farther down. I mean, you could take Rachaad White off these other guys that are farther down. But
James Conner, there's tons of guys down there. Again, that's the argument is would you rather have a guy like that on your team in your flex or get Darren Waller in your tight end?
But I'm going to say if Darren Waller's sitting for you in the 6th round, I'm taking Darren Waller in the 6th round because that means I got 5 rounds of volume. That means I got my 2 starters at running back, or so you could say.
You missed out on the top 4 guys.
Yeah, right? and then it also means that you maybe probably don't have a quarterback too either. So it's you want to try and win at a position.
We talked about it in the mock drafts when I drafted in the 4th round and I drafted TJ Hawkinson. He's the end of my 4th, the top 4. And after the top 4, I think that there's a significant drop off on value. And I probably wouldn't have drafted a tight end probably until the 8th or 9th round. If I didn't get Hawkinson there, I probably wouldn't have touched a tight end till much, much later. But
speaking of Hawkinson, you have him as your number 3. I have him as my number 5. Your number 5 isn't even on my list, and I don't have him quite fully in a position where I feel I've been going back and forth whether I like him at 8 or whether I like him at 9 or even 10. But he's in my top 10, and that's Dallas Goedert.
Yeah, I don't think I can't see how he can be that far down. Now I'll say he's been hurt too. I like this offense a heck of a lot better, and this is consistent with my quarterbacks too. Is I think that there's going to be a big jump in Jalen Hurts and the passing game for the Philadelphia Eagles, and if I think that he's going to take a big jump and the passing game is going to take a big jump, then my opinion is that all the players around him, that goes for Devonta Smith, that goes for A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert, all those guys are going to take a big jump. And we've kind of talked about it as like the number 3, Quez Watkins, is not the number 3 wide receiver there or pass catcher is Dallas Goedert.
It is. No, it is Dallas.
And so even the argument you want to make against T.J. Hawkinson is like they have Jordan Addison and K.J. Osborne and Justin Jefferson. Yeah, you can argue that he's the 3rd or 4th pass catcher there. Like Goddard's number 3. And he has 2 elite guys above him. So he's going to be forgotten about. We've seen Ertz be successful in that offense. We've seen Goddard be successful when he's healthy there in that offense. And that's the reason I put him there at my number 5. And like I said, it's kind of, that 5 down is kind of a jumble of a bunch of like people. I don't think you'll see a consensus like unanimous ranking for all those guys. It's going to be opinion. I mean, like I've seen Kyle Pitts up there. I've seen Dalton Schultz up there. I've seen tons. I've seen the Chig up there, which that I don't get. I don't like. I can't take a Tennessee Titans pass catcher in my top 15 in any position.
I mean, that's purely somebody basing it off of just a small sample size.
He's the Alberto of last year.
Potential, yeah.
He's the Alberto of last year. When everyone was all, Alberto is going to be the top 5 tight end. Nope.
I mean, listen, Dallas Goedert, I will say, is consistent. He has hit that 86-point mark a couple times, 70 on 11 games. 2021 was his best season. Had 109 fantasy points in standard scoring. He did see a drop in his yards per catch last year. He only saw a drop in 1 touchdown, but he's consistently scoring 3 touchdowns in a season. But he did see a drop in yards per catch by 2 whole yards, which is pretty significant. And I think that's just the emergence of A.J. Brown. His targets, over the course of 12 games compared to 15 the year before, were around the same. He had the same amount of receptions. So I just think at the end of the day, for me with Goedert, and why I have him as my number 8, I would say right now on my ranking, is just because I don't see him becoming a 1,000-yard tight end. I don't see him getting above maybe 5 touchdowns on the season, whereas I see someone like Kyle Pitts at 6 can do that. I see someone like Njoku being I think he could be the number 2 option in Cleveland, even with Elijah Moore there. I think he still is a freak athlete, but him and Goddard I have back and forth. And then I obviously, like I said, Waller, Kittle, Hawkinson, Andrews, Kels, all those guys can go for 1,000 on their respective teams.
I can make an argument that Njoku is the number 5 receiving option.
You could, but I also could make the argument he's a number 2. That's what I'm saying. It's like I have Goddard at 8, but I could also drop Goddard down. I just think it's one of those things.
Again, we're talking about like pathways to success, right? So like Kyle Pitts, I can see kind of being up there because pathways to success there's Drake London and then there's him, right, as pass catchers. But they're like they're the bottom 3 team in terms of passing offense in the league. So how do you like anyone there? And Pitts only has 1 touchdown.
Yeah, see, that's why I have him at 6 and not top 5. If that guy was putting up 5-6 touchdowns a season, he's 100% inside your top 5 because of just pure volume and the route tree he runs is just scary.
Right. So Goddard being the number 3 in that offense, I can make an argument for Evan Engram being, like you saw what he did the second half of last season, towards the end of the last season, that he can be in that top 5. I think he's a legitimate threat to be in that top 5 argument. But guys like Pat Freiermuth, who really haven't shown anything, and they bring in Allen Robinson and they have Deontay Johnson, and like how much offense do you think that the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to have?
No, I
Like
agree with you.
people are evaluating Pat Fryermuth as being like that Kenny Pickett is going to throw for 4,500 yards and everyone on that offense is going to feed. Like Pat Fryermuth is the number 4 receiving option on that team, and he's not even a heavy red zone guy. Like I get it. He had 5 or 6 touchdowns last season, so he does get some touchdown volume. I just don't see it as a pathway to success in a team that's going to be very mediocre.
Yeah.
At least not the team itself, but the fantasy statistics. They're going to be very mediocre all the way around. I think that you're going to see a lot of there's not going to be a heavy volume player like Deontay Johnson is going to get his. George Pickens is going to get his. I think Allen Robinson is going to be effective there. I think Fryermuth is going to be effective, but I have him ranked as my 8th tight end.
I actually have him as my 10th tight end because I said the same thing. You still bring in a rookie, Darnell Washington. I mean, let's close up on our top 5 here because I really want us to finish up with Goddard. To me, and this is the last point I'll make, is not a knock on Goddard. It's just that when you get to tight ends 6 through 10, even 6 through 11, because you got to throw someone like Njoku, Schultz, Ingram, Goddard, Pitts, Fryermuth, like those guys there. It is a crapshoot. You could you can move the needle on either one of them and make an argument for one to be more than the other, etc. Right. So in my opinion, that's why we talk about is it worth taking a guy inside that range? If value's there, yeah. Like you're talking about, if some one of these guys falls to the 10th or 11th round and you're sitting there looking at Evan Ingram or you're looking at David Njoku or Dalton Schultz and you're like, I don't have a tight end yet. This guy's here in the 11th round. Are you kidding me? Because people are fading tight ends because everybody wants the top and then not. That's a time to take them. But if you're looking to get a tight end and you're taking the number 7 tight end, which is not equivalent to the number 7 quarterback, number 7 running back, or number 7 wide receiver, and you're taking them in the 6th round, you're setting yourself up to handcuff yourself a little bit because of the value that you're passing up on in running back, wide receiver, and quarterback in that 6th round.
Yeah, I mean, you're better, like we kind of said it before, like you're better off in the 8th, 9th round because like 2 of these guys are going to be available. Like go back-to-back picks and just pick 2 of them. And get, there's nothing wrong with getting Pat Fryermuth and David Njoku or Dalton Schultz and Evan Ingram. Like you'll have matchup plays and you're going to be probably really well off at the tight end position if you hit even 60% of the time on making the right decision between those 2. You might throw up equal numbers to Mark Andrews at the end of the season.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of how I would do it is if I'm not getting Kels or Andrews or Hockenson or Kittle and I want one of these other guys that are in the middle, like anyone immediately after that from 5 until 10, I'm probably going to grab 2 of those guys. And I can wait on that. I don't care what 2 because I think that it's going to be insignificant, the difference of statistics between Darren Waller and Evan Ingram. I think it's going to be inconsequential. So there might be 30 points off, 40 points off. Like that doesn't make a difference to me. So if I can get Darren Waller and Dalton Schultz, or I can get David Njoku and Pat Fryermuth, I'm going to be set up for the season on making good plays. I'll roster 2 tight ends the whole season.
I mean, just food for thought for everybody out there. Top 6 scored over 100 points. I mean, you had Travis Kelce at 200. Then you had Taysom Hill at 140, which, again, I am never going to draft him. I'm never going to want him on. The only time I'm taking him on my team is because I don't want to lose to him for somebody else having him on his roster. You just can't trust him. He had these blow-up weeks, and that's about it. But George Kittle, 140. Hockenson 129, Andrews 117. He missed some games, and then Ingram 103. There wasn't another 100 scoring, tight end there, but you could put Cole Kmet in there. You could put Juwan Johnson who had 92. Like these guys, they're all going to give you weeks, and I don't necessarily agree with Chris in drafting 2 tight ends because I'd like to keep my roster filled with actual value that I know I could plug and play in a flex position at that. But that being said, if you have flex tight end, go ahead. If you don't have flex tight end and you want to go 2 tight ends, you can go Dallas Goedert, you can go Dalton Schultz, and then you can swing back around even a little bit later and take a chance on Mike Gesicki in a new home. You could take a chance on Chig Okonkwo unless somebody jumps up crazy to go get him.
They will.
like to me, these are guys that have opportunity, like Greg Dulcich, like another one that is going to be either drafted early because people are on the hype train, or he's going to fall down there outside, and you're able to get two of the guys for your team that are going to do it. But to me, if I'm with Chris, if I'm not taking one of the top 4 or 5 guys in there, I am going to fade tight end till towards the end. And last year I drafted one. I think I drafted Dawson Knox. I ended up dropping him and picked up David Njoku and Gerald Everett. And I just flip-flopped them on a week-by-week basis, and it got me to the championship.
That's kind of my argument against like kind of what you did, right? You picked up you got lucky and picked up both those guys off the waiver wire, right?
Yeah, I think they were 12th and 13th or 13th and 14th at the end of the season, tight end wise.
Right, like so why wouldn't you draft both of them later? If you can get them in the 13th.
Well, it's harder. The reason is it's harder to hit on 2 tight ends in a draft like that. It's easier to see what they're performing after a few games and spend the money on them. Or spend the money on one than it is to try and hit on 2 tight end. I mean, you know how hard it is to hit on a tight end, period.
Yeah.
So why try and take a chance on 2 when you can use one of those spots? I'd rather take a chance. I'd rather take a chance on a rookie on a new team, like someone like Quentin Johnston, than taking a tight end at that same round. And 2 tight ends.
Tight end in the 14th round.
Yeah, take a chance on that guy because you can always hit unless you're in a league that has multiple tight end starting positions like flexes or anything like that. Not many people are going to carry multiple tight ends either throughout the season because they don't want to take up bench spots. So there's going to be somebody on the waivers that if you don't hit on your tight end that you liked late in the draft, there's somebody of equal or better value that's on the waiver still. So that's why I say I don't like to draft 2 is because I don't want to miss on 2. I'd rather miss on 1 and go pay for 1 than miss on 2. And now I missed out on a guy like Quentin Johnston or Zay Flowers or one of these rookies that, for example, Zeus White over at in the Raiders. If he goes late in the draft because there's a holdout with what's his name? Josh Jacobs. Then all of a sudden Jacobs decide I'm not going to play. I'm not going to play. Now Zeus, Zamir White. Zeus is what they called him at Georgia. Now you got yourself a solid running back that you wasted a tight end spot on that's sitting on your bench. That's my only thought behind it.
Doesn't look Greek to me.
Anyway, guys, thank you, ladies and gents, for tuning in. I know it was a little bit long-winded for the tight ends, but I know a lot of questions coming in the tight ends, and obviously Chris and I don't agree on everything, but that's a good thing because you hear from both sides of us. So like and subscribe if you like the content. Again, click that notification button so you see every time we drop our content for you guys. Leave a comment what your thoughts are. If you think I'm wildly crazy to have Darren Waller as my number 4, tell me. I want to hear it. Drag me through the dirt.
Tell us your strategies at tight end. Like, tell us what you guys do that you guys have seen works in the past without drafting Kels. Because it's drafting Kels and then, like we said, just a mile of crap. So tell us what you've done in the past to make yourself successful at the tight end position, because I think that's a really hot topic for everyone to talk about.
Exactly. And keep an eye out. We have a fun episode coming up here where we got a couple of our league mates back, same ones you've seen in mock drafts and earlier watching the NFL Draft Live. We'll be back doing a nice fantasy roundtable, kind of answering some questions from viewers and also answering questions that come here every single season that we may help answer prior to your drafts. Tune in next time, guys. Thank you.